Hi everybody, happy Friday! It's our last literacy lesson of the week. Make sure that you are ready. We're starting off today with a vocab blast. Okay, so we've got a few new words to learn today. The first word that we are going to look at is enormous. I'll say it and then you can say it. Enormous. Enormous. Fantastic. Enormous means very large. As you can see from the picture here, there is a man with a very large dog. The dog is bigger than he is. That's because it's enormous. Fantastic. The next word that we are going to look at is sequel. Sequel. Let's practice saying that. I'll say it and then you can say it. Sequel. Sequel. Fantastic. So a sequel is a recorded work that continues a story or develops a theme from a previous work. So the example that I've given in the photograph is a poster for Frozen 2. I'm sure we've all heard of the film Frozen. Frozen 2 is the sequel. It follows on, it's got the same characters in it, it's the next story. So that's a sequel. What is it? A sequel. Fantastic. The next word that we are going to look at is beanstalk. I'll say it and then you can say it. Beanstalk. Beanstalk. Fantastic. A beanstalk is a plant that grows beans. You often find them in fairy tales. Maybe you can think of a fairy tale where you've heard about a beanstalk before. And in my picture, I have got a very, very, very tall beanstalk. That's what they look like. They're green and tall. So that's a beanstalk. And the last word that we're going to look at today is giant. I'll say it and then you can say it. Giant. Giant. Fantastic. And I've got a picture of a giant here. You can see that there are trees next to him, but he is so much bigger than those trees. That's because a giant is like a human, but they're so much taller. They're lots bigger. They're a giant. Okay, so they're an imaginary creature that looks like us, that looks like people, but they're a lot bigger. So now that we have learned those words, let's see if we can remember what they are. Our first word, it means very large. There is an enormous, well done, dog in the photo. Our next word is a recorded work that continues a story. We've got Frozen 2. Frozen 2 is the sequel, well done, to Frozen 1. This picture is of a beanstalk. Fantastic. And our last word is an imaginary creature that looks human but is a lot bigger. So they're a very tall, very big human, but they're an imaginary creature. We call them a giant. Fantastic. So now that we know what those words mean, let's see if we can match them back up to the photographs. Ready? The first photograph is of a very big dog. What word is that? Is it giant, enormous, sequel, or beanstalk? Fantastic. That word is representing enormous, an enormous dog. The next one, we've got a picture of Frozen 2. Is that showing a giant, a sequel, or a beanstalk? Brilliant, well done. It's showing a sequel. Then we have got this big, tall plant. Is that a giant or a beanstalk? Brilliant, it's a beanstalk, which means our last photograph is of a giant. Well done, everybody. Oh my goodness, what is this? That's the front of our school. And what's growing out of the ground, going up really high to the sky? What do you think it is? It's big and green, it's got leaves. It's a beanstalk. Oh my goodness. There's a beanstalk growing right outside of the school. I want you to have a think. How did it get there? How did it get there? Tell somebody in the room, how do you think the beanstalk got to be outside of school? Brilliant. Maybe you said something like, maybe somebody planted it. Maybe Miss Wood put it there. Maybe I put it there. What do you think the beanstalk is for? What do you think it's going to be used for? Tell somebody in the room, what do you think the beanstalk is for? Fantastic. Well, I think it's for growing gigantic beans for the kitchen. Maybe it's what we're going to be having for our lunches when we come back to school, some giant beans. Where does it go to? We can see that it stretches up towards the sky, but it doesn't stop. I wonder where it's going to. Where do you think it's going to? Do you think it's going anywhere? Do you think it's going up to the clouds? Where do you think it's going? Fantastic. I think it's going all the way up to the clouds, and there's going to be something at the top of those clouds. And our last question I want you to think about, do you think anybody has climbed it? Because it looks like you might be able to climb it. It's got almost like branches coming off it like a tree, so it looks like maybe somebody would be able to climb it. What do you think? Well done. I don't think anybody has climbed it because I think it would be very dangerous. But maybe you're thinking that one of the other pupils that have been in school have been climbing it. Or maybe you think I climbed it. I don't know. So, this is our new book, Jim and the Beanstalk. Just like the beanstalk outside of our school. What do you think the story is going to be about? What do you think it's going to be about? Fantastic. It's probably going to be about beanstalk. And it's probably going to be about a person called Jim because those words are in the title. Look at the picture. What do you think this picture is of? We've got a very small boy here, and then we've got a very big face. Yeah, maybe it's got a giant in it. Who knows? Do you know any other stories that have beanstalks in? Hopefully you've all heard of the fairy tale Jack and the Beanstalk. We're going to have a watch in a second of the story of Jack and the Beanstalk to remind ourselves of what happens in that story. Okay, so we're going to have a listen now of the story Jack and the Beanstalk being retold to us. It's got some cartoons, I think, to go along with it, just to refresh our memories about what happens in the Jack and the Beanstalk story. I'm going to turn off my video so that you can just focus on what's happening.
Jack and the Beanstalk. Once upon a time, there was a boy named Jack who lived with his poor widowed mother. They had sold almost everything they owned to buy food. When their last cow stopped giving milk, Jack's mother sent him to town to sell it. On the way to town, Jack met a strange fellow who told him stories of magic beans. "Where can I buy some of these magic beans for my mother?" asked Jack. "I have the last 5 magic beans, and I will sell them to you because you are a good boy." The strange man smiled at Jack. "Well, I have nothing but our old cow, and we need the money I would get by selling her for food." The man replied, "Trust me, my boy. These beans will bring you food and fortune, and your mother will be proud." Jack hesitated, but finally traded the cow for the beans. When Jack returned home, his mother was furious and threw the beans out of the kitchen window crying. Jack went to bed that night, sad and hungry. He woke the next morning to find a huge beanstalk growing in the garden. "The beans really are magic," he cried. Jack saw that the stalk reached the clouds. He remembered stories about the clouds containing gold and started climbing the stalk to see what he could find. He climbed and climbed. When he got to the top, he saw a huge castle and headed for it. The door was so big that Jack could crawl beneath it. Once inside, he saw a giant man eating his dinner. When the giant was finished, he called his servant to bring him his bag of gold coins. While counting his money, the giant became drowsy and fell asleep. Jack crept up to the giant and stole his bag of gold. He struggled down the beanstalk with his money, and when he got to the bottom, he called for his mother. Jack's mother was very happy because this money was the same money that the giant had stolen from Jack's father many years ago. But she was also afraid. She knew how dangerous the giant was and made Jack promise he would never go back. While Jack did promise, after a while the money began to run out. Jack began to wonder if he would find anything else in the castle. Once again, Jack decided he would go back up the beanstalk and back to the castle. Once again, he reached the castle and climbed under the castle door. And once again, he found the giant eating dinner at his table. When he was finished this time, however, the giant called for his magic hen. Jack was amazed when he saw the hen lay an egg of pure gold. While the giant was watching the hen, he again became drowsy and fell asleep. Jack crept silently to the table and grabbed the hen. When he returned home, his mother was very angry that Jack had gone back to the castle. She grabbed Jack's axe, intent on cutting the beanstalk down. Jack begged her not to and showed her how the hen could lay golden eggs. Jack's mother put the axe down and watched with delight as the hen laid one beautiful golden egg after another. After a while, Jack's curiosity got the better of him, and he once again thought about what else he could find in the castle. Once again, Jack decided he would go back up the beanstalk and back to the castle. Once again, he reached the castle and climbed under the castle door. And once again, he found the giant eating dinner at his table. And once again, when he was finished this time, however, the giant called for his magic harp. Jack watched as the harp began to play beautiful music all by itself. The music was so beautiful that before long, the lazy giant once again fell fast asleep. Jack crept silently to the table, but as soon as Jack picked up the harp, it began playing very loudly in his strange hands, and the giant awoke. Fee, fi, fo, fum, yelled the giant, and he chased after the boy and his harp. Jack raced to the beanstalk and slid down. He could feel the stalk shake as the giant began climbing down. Luckily, his axe was nearby, and he began chopping down the beanstalk. The beanstalk shook and cracked under the weight of the giant and Jack's chopping. Finally, the stalk snapped, and the giant fell to earth, never to be seen again. Jack and his mother lived happily ever after. The end.
So that's the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. And in the story, we learn that the little boy Jack is a very poor young boy, and his mum is very poor as well. And they decide that they're going to sell their cow so that they can get some money so that they can find food to eat. But instead, Jack gets the magic beans, and he goes up the beanstalk and finds some golden coins. And eventually, the story ends with the giant chasing after Jack and never being seen ever again. I wonder what happened to the giant. Our story that we're going to be reading, Jim and the Beanstalk, is a sequel to Jack and the Beanstalk. Can you remember from our vocab blast what a sequel is? Tell somebody in the room. Fantastic. A sequel is a story that follows on from another story, just like the Frozen film follows on from the first Frozen film. We're going to be writing our own sequel to a fairy story at the end of our literacy unit. But first, we're going to read some of our new story. So whilst you're listening to me read the new story, I want you to have a think about how different this one is to Jack and the Beanstalk. Early one morning, Jim woke up and saw an enormous plant growing outside of his window. "That's funny," he said. "It wasn't there yesterday. I'll see how high it goes." And he began to climb up the plant. What do you think the plant is? Yeah, it's a beanstalk. "It certainly is a big plant," he said, as he went up into the clouds. You can see the city below, all the way up into the clouds Jim went. When he reached the top of the plant, Jim saw a castle. "I'm hungry," he said. "I'll ask at the castle for breakfast. I hope they have cornflakes." So far in our story, what has happened? Just the story that I've read to you, Jim and the Beanstalk, not Jack and the Beanstalk, Jim and the Beanstalk. Tell somebody in the room what's happened in the story so far. Brilliant, well done. So hopefully you said that Jim woke up and saw a strange plant growing outside of his window and he decided to climb it. And eventually he got to the very, very top and there was a castle in the clouds. He decided that he would go and get some breakfast at the castle and he hoped they had cornflakes. What do you think is going to happen next? Think about what we know about the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. When Jack goes into the castle, what happens next? Fantastic. Jack sees the giant and he steals some gold from him. What do you think Jim is going to do? Tell somebody in the room. Fantastic. Maybe you said that Jim might do the same, might go into the castle and meet the giant. We will see what happens in a minute. Before we do that, let's have a think about how similar and different Jack and the Beanstalk and our book, Jim and the Beanstalk, are. What happens in the story that's similar and what happens that's different? You could write down your ideas on a piece of paper, or maybe you want to talk to your adults or brothers and sisters about what happens in the story that's different in Jack and the Beanstalk. If I was doing this, I would start at the beginning and I would think about what happens at the beginning of Jack and the Beanstalk and what happens in the beginning of Jim and the Beanstalk. Pause the video and have a think about what's the same or what's similar and what's different. So hopefully you came up with some ideas like mine. I'm going to read them out to you now. I'm going to start with the ones that are similar. So the stories are similar because the characters' names both start with the letter J. One is called Jack and one is called Jim. In the stories, they both climb up a huge beanstalk. In both the stories, they climb the beanstalk because they're curious about what's up there. In both of the stories, there is a castle in the clouds. In both of the stories, the characters decide to go inside the castle. Now I'm going to think about what's different. Jack's beanstalk grows from some beans that he buys with his cow, not with money. But Jim's appears in the middle of the night and we don't know why. So Jack is the reason that his beanstalk grew because he got the magic beans. But Jim's, we don't know where that came from. Did it come from magic beans? I don't know. In Jack and the Beanstalk, Jack was a poor boy, but we don't know if Jim is poor in this story. We don't really know anything about Jim, except that the beanstalk woke him up. There is no cow or magic beans in Jim's story. We do not know where Jim's beanstalk came from. We've not mentioned a cow and we've not mentioned magic beans, but in Jack's story, there's a cow and there are magic beans. Jack wanted to see if he could get some money from the castle, but Jim just wanted to go and get some breakfast because he was hungry. Well done if you got any of those ideas, and well done if you came up with some of your own. We're going to read a little bit more of our story now and see what happens next and see if any of our predictions are right. Jim ran to the castle and knocked on the door. He waited and waited until the door was slowly opened by a very old giant. "Aha!" said the giant. "A boy, a nice juicy boy. 3 fried boys on a slice of toast. That's what I used to enjoy eating in the old days. But I've got no teeth now. Come in, boy, you're quite safe." There he is, the huge giant. In Jack and the Beanstalk, Jack goes straight under the door without even knocking. How rude. But Jim seems like a nice boy because he knocked on the door and waited to see if anybody would answer. And eventually, the giant came. The giant doesn't seem as scary in this story either. Even though he says he would like to eat the boy, he says he can't eat him anymore because he's not got teeth. So he invites him inside instead. So the stories are slightly different. That's what makes it a sequel. It's got the same sort of characters in it, but the story is a bit different. So far, what has happened? I want you to tell somebody in the room what has happened so far in our story overall. Pause the video, off you go. Brilliant. So we've met Jim. He's climbed up a beanstalk. He's gone to the castle, knocked on the door, and he's been invited inside by a giant. What do you think is going to happen next? We know that the giant can't eat Jim. We know that he's a very old giant. We know that Jim hasn't gone there to try and steal anything, but do you think he's going to take the giant's money anyway? What do you think? Tell somebody in the room. What do you think? Brilliant. So now we have learnt quite a little bit about beanstalks and what might be at the top of the beanstalk. So what your activity is going to be today is to answer these questions again that we answered at the beginning, but I want you to write down what your answers are this time. We know a little bit more now, so maybe we can answer these questions a bit better. We've got a beanstalk growing outside of our school. What do you think is at the top of our beanstalk? How did that beanstalk get there? Where do you think our beanstalk goes to? What do you think people are going to use it for? Do you think anybody that we know might have climbed it? And you're going to answer those questions for your activity today. So, the 1-star challenge, you're going to unscramble the sentences so that they make sense and write the sentence on the leaf, just like a leaf on a beanstalk. So what you need to do is you need to think about the order of the words in this sentence for the 1-star challenge. We know that a sentence has to start with a capital letter. So which of these things has a capital letter? Does this have a capital letter? No. Does this one? No. This one? This one? This one does have a capital letter, so I'm going to put that at the start of my sentence. What do we know happens at the end of a sentence? We have a full stop, so I'm going to look for one with a full stop. Brilliant. Now I need to decide which way round the words go in the middle. I, the beanstalk, think leads to the clouds. We're going to follow the pattern of noun, verb, noun, verb, noun. Nouns are blue and verbs are orange. So I think or I leads to. Which one makes sense? I think, fantastic. I think the beanstalk leads to the clouds. There is my sentence. And now that I've got it in the right order, I'm going to write it onto my leaf. Perfect. So you're going to unscramble all the sentences and write them on the leaves. If you're doing the 2-star challenge, you have got the communicate imprint to help you write your sentences. So you need to choose which things you are going to say. I think the beanstalk grew from magic beans. Or are you going to say, I think the beanstalk came from the sky? Or are you going to say, I think a man planted the beanstalk? It's up to you which one you want to say. And then you're going to write your sentence onto your leaf. Okay, and you're going to write 3 sentences. If you're doing the 3-star challenge, you're making your own sentences from scratch. So you're answering these questions. I want you to choose 3 and answer them in full sentences. For example, how did it get there? I think the beanstalk grew at school because Miss Mannion planted some magic beans. That's just what I think, but that doesn't mean that you have to write the same thing. But I want you to use the questions to help you write an answer, and you're going to write those on the leaves as well. That's it for literacy. I hope you have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you all again on Monday. Bye!